Hi guys, it's Jessica. I'm here with something a little bit different. I've never done this before. I'm going to read a section of some writings that I've done. The idea is that I'm going to write a series of vignettes from the point of view of different people who live in Edensphere. So these will be sometimes short, sometimes long. They will take place in different places and times. So that might get a little confusing. I will try to explain somewhat, but sometimes confusion is just going to be part of it. It's mysterious. That way my crap writing isn't so noticed. But I will try reading aloud to you guys, and hopefully it's not too awful. I'm not very practiced at this, but I'll give it a try. Okay, here goes. Lear, Part 1. I don't know, wavered the tall Fae, his lean fingers curling around the smooth black stone reflexively, its oily surface reflecting the distorted images of the principal lords of the Grey Folk. They gathered around. Their shapes varied, but power was inherent to them all. Some were there in their physical forms, some projections, their physical forms elsewhere. Some existed in another time entirely, such was their power. "This is your magic. You wanted it this way," said one of the Grey Lords, his cloak threadbare, wafting in a breeze from another place. Some would say the magic of the stone bore the stamp of dark unseelie magic, origins of which many suspected the kingdomless Lord Lear of. "We've all agreed. Something must be done. She must be stopped," uttered another Grey Lord. "All eventualities are narrowing, our chances for success dwindling. Pathway convergence is approaching complete exclusion for interference," intoned a floating creature that for all intents and purposes resembled a golden carp with a human face, and countless eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. No one, not even the creature itself, could say in what time or space it actually existed, a being that swam through the golden threads of time and future eventualities. "The seers all agree this is the last of our chances," nodded one of the lords, who inclined his head to the floating carp. He himself resembled a deer-like creature that also bore a man's face. "In some timescapes, the Nephilim child has already been born. Iron has overtaken the world, and we barely cling to survival, mere shadows of our former selves. She must be destroyed." Lear's face hardened, his grip on the oily stone tightening. Not destroyed. That wasn't the bargain. He spoke darkly. The kingdomless lord cared not for the concerns of the Grey Lords. His deal with them was based on another desire. His ambition laid in another direction, fueled by a love warped by jealousy and the drive of possession. "She'll be bound, her powers captured by the stone, and the rest of her will be mine. You promised." "Yes, of course," agreed one of the lords conciliatorily. For who could destroy a goddess? It's said to be impossible. He did not lie, as Fae could not. It was indeed said a god could not be destroyed. It did not mean the Grey Lords would not try. The lord smiled genially. "You will be the guardian of the stone, Lear. They needed the kingdomless lord. Without him they'd never be able to get close enough to the goddess." "I don't know," Lear repeated, his uncertainty returning. "I don't wish her harmed." He loved her after all. His stomach turned at the thought of unleashing the oily magic within the stone upon her. "She'll be yours, Lear," a Grey Lord spoke soothingly, "and you'll have an eternity to watch over her." Lear, Part 2. The goddess was far too lenient in Lear's opinion. The lanky Fae disapproved of much. A human ghost, left free to roam in a fairy realm, the accoutrements of her Christian faith a bane to those of the fairy races. Intolerable. Danu smiled indulgently at him, her long white hair lifted gently by the breeze. He'd expressed his disapproval before of Maria being allowed to exist here. The goddess looked as unperturbed as ever. It is forbidden, yes, as forbidden as an unseelie king in a light court. There was nothing sharp in her tone, but he flinched at her words, bowing his head to her, knowing very well that his existence here he owed wholly to Danu's inordinate tolerance. At the gentle touch of her hand on his, though, his features softened. She squeezed his hand in affection, and when she took it away, he resisted the urge to catch her fingers back into his again. Forbidden. His existence here was perhaps even more prohibited than that of a human ghost, but he could not hold the goddess, not ever. "Should I take Neela's puppy away from her, Lear?" she asked, a smile twisting playfully. "Dogs are forbidden in the realms of fairy too, are they not?" They'd had this discussion before too, when the Fey child had discovered a puppy deep in the dense forest at the heart of Edensphere. Many had called for its quick dispatchment. Once it had been found to be in the child's possession. Only wild beasts could step foot in fairy realms, not the servile creatures of man. Dogs served man. They were the enemies of Fey. "No. Neela can handle a dog. It is no danger, not while under her care." Intolerant, rigid, and generally unfriendly, the lanky, unseelie lord hadn't endeared himself to many here. His status as a lord afforded him a certain amount of respect. Most often, though, he was avoided and alone. There was a general consensus of surprise, then, when Lear had been the most vocal proponent of allowing the dog to stay. That the child Neela was a particular favorite of the goddess was widely held as the reason for this, though strangely, it had been Danu herself he'd argued with the most to let the dog stay. He'd been known to be inordinately pleasant to Neela ever since his lost pixie had been returned to him. "Indeed, as I can handle a human ghost, and an unseelie lord." Her tone was firm now. "Indeed," he replied, bowing his head in acquiescence. Danu nodded, seeming to dismiss the discussion as she looked out over the horizon, a large grassy meadow before them that led down to a glittering lake, a forest crowding around its far bank. Hills followed that into mountains, far off snowy peaks visible on the clear blue day. Two figures approached, Neela and her mother. The dog jumped around them, its barks and the child's giggles reaching them on the breeze brought up from the lake. Neela had been here forever, it seemed, yet he knew she had not. It was something he had a hard time thinking about, or remembering when he tried. He was a strong enough Fae to know it was a spell of some kind, but even that he usually forgot soon enough. The mother, on the other hand, she was a more recent revival. She was which was not unusual in itself. The new was often bringing new residents in. Her people, from many different times and places, but all her descendants. When he questioned her on this, she'd just smile and change the subject, or simply not answer at all. No one else questioned her at all. She was the queen after all, the goddess. And while she called her subjects her children, it was not many she actually allowed within her inner circle. There was Neela. She called her granddaughter, lavishing her with care and attention, and had her often at her side. There was her husband, Cernunnos, the stormy god who ruled over the mountains. He didn't spend as much time among the people as Danu did. And then there was himself, the queen's musician, sometimes advisor, and also rumored courtesan. And now this woman, Herla, Neela's true mother it turned out. And while Danu retrieved many new arrivals, this one was different because it wasn't Danu who'd brought her. It was Neela. The child had traversed time and space, sneaking back and forth between the locked gates of Edensphere to do so. Not even he could do that, not without a serious cost. The child had done it with seeming no effort at all. Danu stepped forward to greet the newcomers. Lear hung back, as was his place. "Grandmother!" exclaimed Neela exuberantly, leaping into Danu's arms and hugging her before jumping up to Lear and proffering him a small bouquet of flowers. Many ignored him, the silent shadow of the queen, but Neela was always sure to acknowledge him. Danu was embracing Herla. The dark-haired woman carried a leather satchel. She was an herbalist, apparently, and he often saw her out collecting herbs, or more likely returning from long walks, her satchel sometimes full, but more times than not empty. She walked to be walking, it seemed. She could look very happy at times, especially when she was talking to Neela, but at other times she looked very lost, haunted. It could be hard for some of these transplants that Danu brought in, often from very different places and existences. Herla had lived as a deer, it seemed, which wasn't so different for Alurulin. Most of Danu's progeny could exist as deer if they so chose. But Herla, it seemed, had never remembered any other form. Her transition had been difficult, and she grieved too. I'm always looking, he heard Danu say to Herla. The queen held Herla's hands in her own. He will be found. She grieved. She had her daughter, but her husband was lost. Okay, thanks for listening. Really super appreciate it if you made it this far. I have to admit I've been making these videos and it's fine, but me reading aloud something that I wrote was very difficult for me, and I had filmed a version of me actually reading it and, you know, filming me reading, and I was just too embarrassed. So be gentle. If you prefer reading and you don't want to listen to me actually read out loud the story and you just want to read it yourself, I'm uploading these stories to my Wattpad, which is, my username is Sighthoundlady. So I'll put the address in the down bar below so that you can check that out if you're interested in reading those and just want to skip the whole me reading things out loud. But again, thanks so much if you listened. Here's Lear saying thank you for listening to his part of the story, and I hope you all have a great week. Take care. Bye.